Hello, and welcome to me looking like an incredibly shiny orange. This is a great time for me to figure out what I need to do for class because I don't love looking shiny and orange. Does anyone love that? So I'm a little less shiny, but it's still just like shine central. I hate it. Why am I so all the time? It's very upsetting. Today is the day I should probably email my professor and be like, I'm not taking your class anymore. And I'm one of the last two students in the class, and I feel really bad, but it's also the right choice for me. Oh, this lighting could be worse in here, but I don't know how. Why? I'm so tired. So let's talk about nothing. I'm gonna make meatloaf today and call my parents. Meatloaf is gonna be important for the next several days because I need to eat meatloaf for the next several days. It's a vegetarian meatloaf that I have liked in the past, so I'm positive that I'll like it in the future. Last night I watched Hocus Pocus for the first time. It was brilliant. I loved it. It was so fun. What a fun time. And I've also been watching The Good Place, but there's only 12 episodes and I'm already halfway through and I'm like, who let this show be so short? But also like the thing is, and I've read like a Tumblr post about this. Most like other countries, their TV shows are a lot shorter than American TV shows, which are usually like 22, 24 episodes. Other countries, like Sherlock, is only 3 episodes a season. But that's why their TV can be so good, is because they take the time to write the episodes and they don't produce as many. And also, it means that they can have more humane working hours. The hours in the film industry in America are bad, really bad. A regular day that at the end of it, you're like, oh, good, is 12 hours long with one 1-hour break. So it's crazy. And then I was talking to my internship, and it's like sometimes they don't give you the hour break and they just pay you a little more afterwards. It's like, no, that's not okay. People routinely die in the American film industry because they're so tired driving home after work that they crash on the road. That happens all the time. And like sometimes I know that like KJ Appa on Riverdale, they pulled like a 16-hour day or something, and he crashed on the way home. He didn't die, but he still got into like a car crash. And so anyways, I will never I will do whatever it takes to get my cruise out before 12 hours. Because it's just not fair. It's just not fair to you. Like, when do you see your kids? If you have kids. Like, you're supposed to be on set from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. You're telling me you're going to go home and make dinner? I don't think so. So it's just a very unhealthy work schedule that, like, I want to be in it, but I'm also like, that's so hard. Anyways, enough of that. This is not a blog. This is me reading aloud Northanger Abbey, where yesterday some shit went down. So yesterday, what happened was Catherine and Eleanor are going to be left home alone for like a week because the general's going to London. And they're kind of like, oh, thank God, we can just do what we want and the general won't be like worried about like if we're happy or something. So they go off. And then that night at 11 o'clock, a carriage pulls up. And they're like, what? That's weird. And so Eleanor's like, oh, it's got to be my older brother. Hello! And Eleanor's like, and Catherine's like, okay, cool, I'm just going to go to bed. Like, it's going to be a little weird, but like, whatever, we'll figure it out. Older brother is Captain Tilney, the one who besmirched James, Catherine's brother, for Isabella's affection. don't think besmirched was the right word, but I like it. So Isabella's been no. So and then Eleanor comes up to Catherine's room and is like, Catherine, I have really bad news and I feel really weird about it, but like I have to tell you. And Catherine's like, yeah, what's up? Like, go ahead, what's going on? And Isabella's like, my dad just remembered this engagement that we have as a family that we have to leave like in 3 days. And so like I know we just talked about you staying for like another 4 weeks, but like now we have to go in 3 days. And Catherine's like don't worry about it. Like it's always important to like keep your prior engagements and like I'm not gonna be upset. Like I'll just leave right before you guys leave and we can like continue our visit at some other point. And Catherine's like, no, you don't understand. You have to leave, not Catherine. And Eleanor's like, you have to leave tomorrow at 7 a.m. And I like can't really tell you why. And Catherine's like, wait, what do you mean I have to leave tomorrow at 7 a.m.? Like, I mean, it's okay. Like, your dad will like send a servant with me and like do whatever, but like, okay. And then Isabella's like, no, he can't send a servant. Not Isabella. Eleanor's like, he can't send a servant with you. Like, you have to go alone 70 miles. And Catherine's like, what? What? And like, her family doesn't know that she's coming back. Like, Captain Tilney, General Tilney, is like, doesn't say anything to her, doesn't make any apologies. And she's like, what's going on? Did I offend him? I don't know what's happening. And so she goes to sleep. Of course, she's super upset. And the next morning, like, she and Isabella, not Isabella, I don't know why, she and Eleanor, like, say goodbye. And like, they barely remember to, like, Eleanor barely remembers to give, what's her name? Catherine barely remembers to like give Catherine some money to travel on because Catherine doesn't have any money anymore because she's been told to leave in less than like 3 days, in less than like 24 hours, like in less than 12 hours. She had to leave over 12 hours and she doesn't get any explanation. She doesn't get to say goodbye to Henry. She's just like super confused. She's like, Isabella's like, no, Eleanor is like, you have to write to me, but you can't write to me as your name. You have to write to me from a different name. Oh my God. Is that why? That's crazy. Why did I not pick that up before chapter 14? So anyways, Catherine doesn't know what's going on. Her family doesn't know that she's arriving. Like, everything is blown. She's super confused, obviously very anxious that she somehow offended the dad. So we're going to find out what happens next right now. Excuse me. Is the fan too loud? Let me know and I'll turn it off. Northanger Abbey, Volume 2, Chapter 14. Catherine was too wretched to be fearful. The journey in itself had no terrors for her, and she began it without either dreading its length or feeling its solitariness. Leaning back in one corner of the carriage in a violent burst of tears, she was conveyed some miles beyond the walls of the Abbey before she raised her head, and the highest point of ground within the park was almost closed from her view before she was capable of turning her eyes towards it. Unfortunately, the road she now traveled was the same which only 10 days ago she had so happily passed along in going to and from Woodston. And for 14 miles, every bitter feeling was rendered more severe by the review of objects on which she had first looked under impressions so different. Every mile, as it brought her nearer Woodston, added to her sufferings, and when within the distance of 5, she passed the turning which led to it, and thought of Henry so near, yet so unconscious, her grief and agitation were excessive. The day which she had spent at the place had been one of the happiest of her life. It was on that day that the general had made use of such expressions with regard to Henry and herself, and had spoken and so looked as to give her the most positive conviction of his actually wishing their marriage. Yes, only 10 days ago had he elated her by his pointed regard, had he even confused her by his too significant reference. And now, what had she done or what had she omitted to do to merit such a change? It's gotta be Isabella. Isabella's gotta be involved. The only offence against him of which she could accuse herself had been such as was scarcely possible to reach his knowledge. Henry in her own heart only were privy to the shocking suspicions which she had so idly entertained, and equally safe did she believe her secret with each. Designedly, at least, Henry could not have betrayed her. If indeed, by any strange mischance, his father should have gained intelligence of what she had dared to think and look for, of her causeless fancies and injurious examinations, she could not have any wonder at any degree of his indignation. If aware of her having viewed him as a murderer, she could not wonder at his even turning her from his house. But a justification so full of torture to herself, she trusted would not be in his power. Anxious as were all her conjectures on this point, it was not, however, the one on which she dwelt most. There was There was a thought yet nearer, a more prevailing, more impetuous concern. How Henry would think, and feel, and look when he returned on the morrow to Northanger, and heard of her being gone, was a question of force and interest to rise over every other, to be never ceasing, alternately irritating and soothing. It sometimes suggested the dread of his calm acquiescence, and at others was answered by the sweetest confidence in his regret and resentment. To the general, of course, he would not dare speak, but to Eleanor. What might he not say to Eleanor about her? I love that. In this unceasing reoccurrence of doubts and inquiries on any one article of which her mind was incapable of more than momentary repose, the hours passed away and her journey advanced much faster than she had looked for. The pressing anxieties of thought which prevented her from noticing anything before her, when once beyond the neighborhood of Woodston, saved her at the same time from watching her progress, and though no object on the road could engage a moment's attention, she found no stage of it tedious. From this she was preserved too by another cause, by feeling no eagerness for her journey's conclusion, for to return in such a manner to Fullerton was almost to destroy the pleasure of a meeting with those she loved best, even after an absence such as hers. An 11 weeks' absence. What had she to say that would not humble herself and pain her family, that would not increase her own grief by the confession of it, extend a useless resentment, and perhaps involve the innocent with the guilty in undistinguishing ill will? She could never do justice to Henry and Eleanor's merit. She felt it too strongly for expression, and should a dislike be taken against them, should they be thought of unfavorably on their father's account, it would cut her to the heart. With these feelings, she rather dreaded than sought for the first view of that well-known spire which would announce her within 20 miles of home. Salisbury she had known to be her point on leaving Northanger. But after the first stage, she had been indebted to the postmasters for the names of the places which were then to conduct her to it. So great had been her ignorance of her route? She met with nothing, however, to distress or frighten her. Her youth, civil manners, and liberal pay procured her all the attention that a traveler like herself could require, and stopping only to change horses, she traveled on for about 11 hours without accident or alarm, and between 6 and 7 o'clock in the evening found herself entering Fullerton. A heroine returning at the close of her career to her native village, in all the triumph of recovered reputation and all the dignity of a countess, with a long train of noble relations in their several phaetons, and 3 waiting maids in a travelling chaise and 4 behind her, is an event on which the pen of the contriver may well delight to dwell. It gives credit to every conclusion, and the author must share in the glory she so liberally bestows. But my affair is wildly different. I bring back my heroine to her home in solitude and disgrace, with no sweet elation of spirits, and no sweet elation of spirits can lead me into minuteness. A heroine in a hack post-chaise, in such a blow upon sentiment as no attempt at grandeur or pathos can withstand. Swiftly, therefore, shall her postboy drive through the village, amid the gaze of Sunday groups, and speedy shall be her descent from it. But whatever might But whatever might be the distress of Catherine's mind as she thus advanced towards the parsonage, whatever the humiliation of her biographer in relating it, she was preparing enjoyment of no everyday nature for those to whom she went, first in the appearance of her carriage, and secondly in herself. The chaise of a traveller being a rare sight in Fullerton, the whole family were immediately at the window, and to have it stop at the sweep gate was a pleasure to brighten every eye and occupy every fancy. A pleasure quite unlooked for by all but the two youngest children, a boy and girl of 6 and 4 years old, who expected a brother or sister in every carriage. Happy the glance that first distinguished Catherine. Happy the voice that proclaimed the discovery. But whether such happiness were the lawful property of George or Harriet could never be exactly understood. Her father, mother, Sarah, George, and Harriet, all assembled at the door to welcome her with affectionate eagerness, was a sight to awaken the best feelings of Catherine's heart. And in the embrace of each, as she stepped from the carriage, she found herself soothed beyond anything that she had believed possible. So surrounded, so caressed, she was even happy. In the joyfulness of family love, everything for a short time was subdued, and the pleasure of seeing her, leaving them at first little leisure for calm curiosity. They were all seated round the tea table, which Mrs. Morland had hurried for the comfort of the poor traveller, whose pale and jaded look soon caught her notice, before any inquiry so direct as to demand a positive answer was addressed to her. Whew! I don't know why it's really getting to me today. Reluctantly, and with much hesitation, did she then begin what might perhaps at the end of half an hour be termed by the courtesy of her hearers an explanation. But scarcely within that time could they at all discover the cause or collect the particulars of her sudden return. They were far from being an irritable race, far from any quickness in catching or bitterness in resenting affronts. But here, when the whole world was unfolded, was an insult not to be overlooked, nor, for the first half hour, to be easily pardoned. Without suffering any romantic alarm, in the consideration of their daughter's long and lonely journey, Mr. and Mrs. Morland could not but feel that it might have been productive of much unpleasantness to her, that it was what they could never have voluntarily suffered, and that in forcing her on such a measure, General Tilney had acted neither honorably nor feelingly, neither as a gentleman nor as a parent. Why he had done it, what could have provoked him to such a breach of hospitality, and so suddenly turned all his partial regard for their daughter into actual ill will, was a matter which they were at least as far from divining as Catherine herself. But it did not oppose them by any means so long. And after a due course of useless conjecture that it was a strange business, and that he must be a very strange man, grew enough for all their indignation and wonder, though Sarah indeed was still indulged in the sweets of incomprehensibility, exclaiming and conjecturing with youthful ardor, "My dear, you give yourself a great deal of needless trouble." And said her mother, "My dear, you give yourself a great deal of needless trouble," said her mother at last. "Depend upon it, it is something not at all worth understanding." "I can allow for his wishing Catherine away when he recollected this engagement," said Sarah, "but why not do it civilly?" I am sorry for the young people," returned Mrs. Morland. "They must have a sad time of it, but as for anything else, it is no matter now. Catherine is safe at home, and our comfort does not depend upon General Tilney." Catherine sighed. "Well," continued her philosophic mother, "I am glad I did not know of your journey at the time, but now it is all over, perhaps there is no great harm done. It is always good for young people to be put upon exerting themselves. And you know, my dear Catherine, you always were a sad little shadow-brained creature." "A what?" "But now you must have been forced to have your wits about you, with so much changing of chaises and so forth, and I hope 'twill appear that you have not left anything behind you in way of the pockets." I love that. That's what I'm going to say when I lose track of something. Have I left anything behind me in the way of the pockets? Nobody's gonna understand a thing I say, which is just how I like it. Um, Catherine hoped so too, and tried to feel an interest in her own amendment, but her spirits were quite worn down, and to be silent and alone becoming soon her only wish, she readily agreed to her mother's next counsel of going early to bed. Her parents, seeing nothing in her ill looks and agitation but the natural consequence of mortified feelings, and of the unusual exertion and fatigue of such a journey, parted from her without any doubt of their being soon slept away. And though, when they all met the next morning, her recovery was not equal to their hopes, they were still perfectly unsuspicious of there being any deeper evil. They never once thought of her heart, which, for the parents of a young lady of 17, just returned from her first excursion from home, was odd enough. As soon as breakfast was over, she sat down to fulfill her promise to Miss Tilney, whose trust in the effect of time and distance on her friend's disposition was already justified, for already did Catherine reproach herself for having parted from Eleanor coldly, with having never enough valued her merits or kindness, and never enough commiserated her for what she had been yesterday left to endure. The strength of these feelings, however, was far from assisting her pen, and never had it been harder for her to write than in addressing Eleanor Tilney. To compose a letter which might at once do justice to her sentiments and her situation, convey gratitude without servile regret, be guarded without coldness, and honest without resentment, a letter which Eleanor might not be pained by the perusal of, and above all which she might not blush herself if Henry should chance to see, was an undertaking to frighten away all her powers of performance, and after long thought and much perplexity, to be very brief, was all she could determine on with any confidence of safety. The money, therefore, which Eleanor had advanced was enclosed with little more than grateful thanks, and the 1,000 good wishes of a most affectionate heart. This has been a strange acquaintance, observed Mrs. Morland, as the letter was finished. Soon made and soon ended. I am sorry it happened so, for Miss Allen thought them very pretty kind of young people, and you were sadly out of luck too in your Isabella. Poor James. Well, we must live and learn, and the next friends you make, I hope, will be better worth keeping. Eleanor colored as she warmly answered, No friend could be better worth keeping than Eleanor. If so, my dear, I dare say you will meet again some time or other. Do not be uneasy. It is 10 to 1, but you are thrown together again in the course of a few years, and then what a pleasure it will be. Mrs. Morland was not happy in her attempt at consolation. The hope of meeting again in the course of a few years could only put into Catherine's head what might happen within that time to make a meeting dreadful to her. She could never forget Henry Tilney or think of him with less tenderness than she did at that moment. But he might forget her, and in that case to meet. Her eyes filled with tears as she pictured her acquaintance so renewed, and her mother, perceiving her comfortable suggestions to have had no good effect, proposed as another expedient for restoring her spirits that they should call on Mrs. Allen. Now I feel like Mrs. Allen has the goss. Good Lord. Okay. There were 2 houses. The 2 houses were only a quarter of a mile apart, and as they walked, Mrs. Morland quickly dispatched all that she felt on the score of James's disappointment. We are sorry for him, said she, but otherwise there is no harm done in the match going off, for it could not be a desirable thing to have him engaged to a girl whom we had not the smallest acquaintance with, and who was so entirely without fortune. And now, after such behavior, we cannot think at all well of her. Just at present it comes hard to poor James, but that will not last forever, and I dare say he will be a discreeter man all his life for the foolishness of his first choice. This was just such a summary view of the affairs Catherine could listen to. Another sentence might have endangered her compliance, and made her reply less rational, for soon were all her thinking powers swallowed up in the reflection of her own charge of feelings and spirits since last she had trodden that well-known road. It was not 3 months ago since, wild with joyful expectation, she had there run backwards and forwards some 10 times a day, with a heart light, gay, and independent. looking forward to pleasures untasted and unalloyed, and free from the apprehension of evil as from the knowledge of it. 3 months ago had seen her all this, and now how altered a being did she return. She was received by the Allens with all the kindness which her unlooked-for appearance, acting on a steady affection, would naturally call forth. And great was their surprise, and warm their displeasure, on hearing how she had been treated, though Mrs. Morland's account of it was no inflated representation. Though Mrs. Morland's account of it was no inflated representation, no studied appeal to their passions. Catherine took us quite by surprise yesterday evening, said she. She travelled all the way post by herself, and knew nothing of coming till Saturday night, for General Tilney, for some odd fancy or other, all of a sudden grew tired of having her there, and it almost turned her out of the house. Very unfriendly, certainly. He must be a very odd man, but we are so glad to have her amongst us again. And it is a great comfort to find that she is not a poor helpless creature, but can shift very well for herself. Mr. Allen expressed himself on the occasion with the reasonable resentment of a sensible friend, and Mrs. Allen thought his expressions quite good enough to be immediately made use of again by herself. His wonder, his conjectures, and his explanations became in succession hers, with the addition of this single remark. I think this is Mrs. Allen, but I have no memory of what Mrs. Allen's voice was. I really have not patience with the General, to fill up every accidental pause. And I really have not patience with the General was uttered twice after Mr. Allen left the room, without any relaxation of anger or any material digression of thought. A more considerable degree of wandering attended the third repetition, and after completing the fourth, she immediately added, "Only, my dear, of my having got that frightful great rent in my best Mechlin so charmingly mended before I left Bath that one can hardly see where it was. I must show it to you some day or other. Bath is a nice place, Catherine, after all. I assure you I did not above half like coming away. Mrs. Thorpe's being there was such a comfort to us, was it not? You know you and I were quite forlorn at first." "Yes, but that did not last long," said Catherine, her eyes brightening at the recollection of what had first given spirit to her existence there. "Very true. We soon met with Mrs. Thorpe, and then we wanted not for nothing. My dear, do you not think these silk gloves wear very well? I put them on the first time of our going to the lower rooms, you know, and I have worn them a great deal since. Do you remember that evening?" "Do I? Oh, perfectly." "It was very agreeable, was it not? Mrs. Tilney drank tea with us, and I always thought him, Mr. Tilney drank tea with us, and I always thought him a great addition. He is so very agreeable. I have a notion you danced with him, but I am not quite sure. I remember I had my favorite gown on, the important details only." Catherine could not answer, and after a short trial of the other subjects, Mrs. Allen again returned to, "I really have no patience with the General. Such an agreeable, worthy man as he seemed to be. I do not suppose, Mrs. Morland, you ever saw a better bred man in your life. His lodgings were taken the very day after he left them, Catherine, but no wonder, Milsom Street, you know." As they walked home again, Mrs. Morland endeavored to impress on her daughter's mind the happiness of having such steady well-wishers as Mr. and Mrs. Allen, and the very little consideration which the neglect or unkindness of slight acquaintance, like the Tilneys, ought to have with her, while she could preserve the good opinion and affection of her earliest friends. There was a great deal of good sense in all this. Okay, there is a beeping happening. But there are some situations of the human I'm losing it. Mind in which good sense has very little power, and Catherine's feelings contradicted almost every position her mother advanced. It was upon the behavior of these very slight acquaintances that all her present happiness depended, and while Mrs. Morland was successfully confirming her own opinion, excuse me, And while Mrs. Morland was successfully confirming her own opinions by the justness of her own representations, Catherine was silently reflecting that now Henry must have arrived at Northanger. Now he must have heard of her departure, and now, perhaps, they were all setting off for Hereford. And that's the end of that chapter. Well, nothing was established. No hot goss was delivered. And, oh my God. There's only one chapter left. Oh, wait, no, there's 2 chapters left, but one of them is only like 3 pages long. Well, the mystery continues, and we'll find out tomorrow. Tomorrow is Monday. I don't have class tomorrow, but I technically do. But anyways, I'll be in at 3 to finish we're probably gonna finish tomorrow. Let's be real. To finish Northanger Abbey and find out what the heck happens. What the heck is going on? I still don't love Henry as a match. He just doesn't have as much character. No. It's not done. It's not done. Tomorrow it's done. I just don't love Henry as a match. He's just like, I mean, I'm comparing him with like Darcy and Edward and Colonel Brandon. And they're just like such stronger, they say things of such a stronger character. It feels like they're really in love. So I'm kind of hoping, and like, I don't know if I have no idea how this is going to end. I'm kind of hoping they don't get together because I don't feel like, it feels like they kind of have like a crush on each other, but like, that's not substance to get married, Jane. So like, just like some of the marriage speeches that Darcy gives to Elizabeth are like, whew. I can't remember if I love you body and soul is like, oh, I love you most ardently. It's just like, take me out. And then what does Colonel Brandon say? He's like, to your sister, I wish all imaginable happiness, and to what's his face that he may endeavor to deserve her. That's me being blown backwards. Isn't that just like, there's nothing like Captain what's his face Tilney is just like, hey, you said that word wrong. And I'm like, that's not that cute. So I'm kind of hoping they don't get married because I don't really like him that much, and like it feels like they don't have like an adult relationship. It feels like all of the other characters like intricately, like truthfully knew each other. And I don't feel like Catherine and Henry like really know each other. You know? I feel like she's just kind of like, he's a cute guy. And like, oh, it's so fun to like think about being an adult. And it's like, but she's not an adult. And I don't want her to get married because I don't feel like she's going to really actually be happy down the line with Henry. Anyways, send me all your favorite Darcy, Edward, Colonel Brandon quotes, and I'll just be here thinking about the words that people use to say that they're in love with people, and I think it's beautiful. Once again, Much Ado About Nothing will always be my most favorite confessions of love. Benedict says, I do love nothing in the world so well as you, is not that strange. And that's just like, I've heard that line played for laughs before. I don't know. I sometimes I like it played for laughs and sometimes I don't, because it's just like, I'm so crazy in love with you. I don't know what to do with it. I don't know what's happening to me. And then Beatrice says, I love you with so much of my heart that none is left to protest. And that's also like, that's killer. And those lines are so simple. I just love the bard. He just says some cool shit. He also says some really messed up shit as well. But, I mean, there's no excuse for that. But I do love some of those lines. Some of those lines can just knock me down for a day. Okay, well that was too many love confession lines. My brain is going into overdrive. But I will see you all tomorrow at 3 o'clock for the thrilling conclusion of Northanger Abbey, and likely the thrilling conclusion of me reading on YouTube Live every day. When I say likely, I mean, yeah, I'm not going to read every day anymore. But I might try once a week because that would be fun. Get the gang back together. See what happens. And the next one would be Middlemarch because I want to read that. But yeah, that's all for today. I'm pretty sure I'm late to a meeting with my parents. When I say meeting, I mean calling them, but everything feels like a meeting to me. I have to go. We never confirmed the time, so this is really on them. Trying to schedule a meeting with me in like the few hours before it happens. Okay, I'm going now. I gotta go. Okay, thank you for tuning in. I'm really excited to see what happens. I don't think I've not known the conclusion of one of our books before. So this is really exciting. Okay, goodbye. Bye. Goodbye.